All right, everybody. Welcome again to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich, with my partner in crime, Mr. Sean Williams. How you doing tonight, Sean?
Fantastic. It's another wonderful day in the off season. And before we go any further, the title for tonight, and I'm getting this is really happening, man. I get a chance to talk about these songs that I chose to
There you
name the
go.
show.
There you go.
Probably one of, if not Motley Crue, then the other band in the '80s Sunset Strip scene, heavy metal movement. At the very beginnings was a band named Rat and
Round
Roll.
and round.
Yes. He can be taught. Thank you, Jesus. Um, Off of that very first album, which Round and Round was off of their second album, Invasion of Your Privacy. Off of their first album, there was a song called Back for More, which is the title of our show tonight. Uh, the incredible solo work of Warren DeMartini and Robin Crosby, and a bass line that is part this, that, and something else along the way, by Juan Crocier, one of my biggest influences when I played. And the vocals of Stephen Pearcy and the backbeat of Bobby Bloxer. These guys were awesome. And that's where the name of the song came in.
Okay, I got you. Hey, I forgot to look on the schedule. We don't play the Giants or the Jets this year, do we?
Yes, we do. We play the Giants week 4.
In New York?
Yes.
No. Yes, in New York?
Yes.
Okay. I thought it was. I just couldn't remember.
We played the Jets last year.
Maybe we can make this the theme when we get. Yeah, I thought we played. We can maybe make this the theme song for that week when we play the Giants. All right, come on. It's been a long time since I watched this video. Oh, geez. It has been a long time since I watched this video.
Get on stage!
Can you hear it?
Yes.
No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys. Oh, God. You know, we did one of those. I did one of those Facebook things, top 10 albums that influenced you, whatever. And the one album I did not include in the list because it's not so much that it influenced me, but it was one of those albums that you had to play in the 80s, and it was Licensed to Ill by the Beastie Boys. So.
Yeah, I followed your top 10 albums, and
it's just 10 albums. It's just 10 albums that influenced me. It's not like my 10 favorite, although
for you that's probably, top 10 though.
Yeah.
The Chicago, okay, the 38 Special Tour de Force.
Mm-hmm.
I was all up in that. Everyone that you mentioned took me back to a different time, many years ago, and
Van Halen's
that's what music is supposed to do.
Yeah, Van Halen's first album. What else I had? Boston's first album. Fleetwood Mac's.
With the devil.
That whole album, that whole Van Halen album. You know, Jamie's Crying, Atomic Pump, Ice Cream Man.
Eruption.
You know. Anyway, this is not a music show. This is a football show, and I hear you getting paid.
Yeah. Well, I've got company tonight.
Well, that's good.
Well, before I can't call myself an award-winning sports journalist. Before all of that, I'm dad.
There you go. Okay. All right, let me see. I'm doing two things at one time. So you got some birthday announcements first, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. One of our very, very good friends and longtime supporters, Arnold Learson, who I still think one of these days I'm going to cover as a New Orleans Saint, and the professor, Christopher Stacy. Today is their birthdays, and I want to wish them both a very, very happy birthday. Uh, Alan, if you could pay the bills real quick, I need to step out off camera for 1 second.
Okay, all right. I don't get to do that very often, but let's go. Um, First, we want to thank, as always, our sponsor, Fan First Productions. Without them, we would never show. You can follow us on iTunes. You can follow us on YouTube. You can also, what the heck? You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, all forms of social media. No Instagram for us because our faces are bad enough that you have to see us on YouTube. You don't want to see us on Instagram. Last week, we were talking about the schedule in regards to the Mark Ingram suspension and the impact that will have on the schedule. Let's assume that Mark's going to serve a 4-game suspension because he may very well only serve 3. But let's assume he serves a 4-game suspension. His first game back would then be what? The Redskins game October 8th, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will.
So if he's back for October 8th against the Redskins, now this is the revenge game, at least for Washington. They'll have a different quarterback. They have Alex Smith this time at quarterback. How do you think that game would play out?
I don't, to be completely honest with you. I don't. It's the Skins had us beat a year ago or this season. And Drew Brees did what Drew Brees does, aided largely by not so much the offensive prowess of the Saints, nearly so much as ineptitude of the Redskins, in my opinion. But this is not going to be that same team that came into the Superdome for that game last year. First and foremost, they will not be led on the field by Kirk Cousins. And, Alex Smith may be as good as or better quarterback than Kirk Cousins, but yet and still he's going to be only 5 games into seasonal action with a new team. So the wrinkles probably aren't going to be completely worked out by that point. You have basically no running game to speak of. I'm not real certain about what kind of receiving core you're going to field. Obviously, your defense a year ago wasn't all that. I'm not sure exactly what kind of threat to the Saints the Redskins are going to pose beyond what the Saints allow them to, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, clearly this season is going to have to start to play out for itself. And this is what we talked about last week, how important it is the Saints go through those first 3 games with at least a 3-1 record, because you don't want to go 2-2, and especially with 2 divisional games in there. You don't want to go 2-2 in that 4-game stretch because, 13-3 is probably the worst you can do and still have the number 1 or number 2 seed. And as we saw last year, having to play that extra game, that extra wild card playoff game, really hinders the Saints because it's so much easier, especially when you have home field advantage, to know you only have to win 2 games to go to the Super Bowl as opposed to 3. And having those 2 games at home is paramount. So a 3-1 record's the worst they can do in those first 4 games. The Redskins are a team that we always struggle to beat. I think I had the stat last time, and let me look at it again. I know we've only beaten the Redskins twice under Sean Payton. That was in 2009. And Meacham steals the ball play. And it was last year. And let's see.
I can remember in, I want to say maybe 2014. It may have been 2015. The Brandon Browner year.
Oh, that was horrible. That was 2015.
I consider either it's kind of a toss up as to which side of the bed you wake up on that particular day. The absolute lowest point in the Sean Payton coaching tenure in New Orleans would either be the Redskins game that year or the Eagles game that year. One or the other.
Yeah, the Eagles game, that was just the worst offensive line performance I'd ever seen for a Saints team. That was just horrible. Okay, the Redskins have a 17-9 series lead on the Saints. Yeah, and as I thought, we've only beaten the Redskins twice under Sean Payton, 2009 and last year. So we played them 6 times. No, 6 times. I got to make sure I got my years right. Yeah. So we're 2-4 against the Redskins under Payton. Prior to that, then we had 2 great wins against the Redskins with, believe it or not, Aaron Brooks and Jim Haslett. In the one I remember best is 2002 game. That was the game Michael Lewis went crazy. They won 43-27. They also beat him in a close game, 24-20. Both of those were FedEx Field. Playing in the Dome, the Saints have only beaten the Redskins 2 times in the Dome. And prior to last year, the last time they beat the Redskins in the Dome was when they played 3 games in 11 days back in 1992. They played the Falcons, the Bills, and the Redskins, and they won all 3. No, they lost to the Bills. They won 2 out of those 3 games. 3 games in 11 days. It's just the way the schedule fell. Yeah. The first time they beat the Redskins, believe it or not, was when the Saints were in the same division as Washington back in 1967.
Good God.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's been a minute ago.
Wait, what was that?
That's been a minute ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to have to offer an undergraduate course for that on our on our Facebook page sometime.
Well, Washington, Cleveland, used to be Dallas for a long time, but we've sort of had a lot more success against the Cowboys as of late. But yeah, that's a lot of teams the Saints have losing records against. It's just because you don't play them that often. Yeah,
I'm gonna give you a hot take. I guarantee that no matter what happens the week that we play the Redskins, there is absolutely no way whatsoever we'll lose the following week.
No, we will not, because that's the bye week. Which, depending
you ratted me out, man.
Yeah, well, depending on how Ingram plays, at least practices that week, if the Saints are 3-1 and the running game is really doing well, I can see them possibly holding Ingram out the 8th as well and letting him get fully conditioned during the bye week and then save him for the other team that Drew Brees has never beaten, the only team he has never beaten, the Baltimore Ravens, which is October 21st. If he beats the Ravens, then Drew Brees will have successfully beaten every team in the NFL, including the Saints.
How many times has that happened?
Peyton Manning's the only other one who's ever done this that I know of, just off the top of my head. Probably Joe Montana's done it, because Joe Montana beat the 49ers as a Kansas City Chief. I would really have to go and do some research on that, because those are the only guys I can really think of. Yeah, those are the only guys I can really think of that have switched teams and would have beaten everybody. So, yeah, he's never beaten the Ravens as a Charger nor as a Saint. In fact, the Saints last beat Baltimore in Baltimore back in 2002. That was the game that Aaron Brooks got hurt the week before against the team that ended up winning the Super Bowl, Tampa Bay. He got the shoulder injury, injured his AC joint, I believe it was, and he only could last a half against the Ravens defense. And Jake Delhomme came in and won the game for him in the second half. And that was the last win the Saints would have in the 2002 season. They were 9-6, or no, 9 Yeah, they were 9-4 at that point of the season, 9-4, and they would lose the next 3 games. They only needed to win 1 to go to the playoffs, and that's ugly. That was the turning point to me. That was always a turning point of the Hazlitt Brooks era. Was those 3 games and the aftermath in the 2002 season? Because Jake came in for the last series against the Bucks, threw a key pass to Joe Horn for a first down to seal that win. Then he came in the following week against the Ravens, finished that game. We won that game. Then the following week, we played the Minnesota Vikings in New Orleans. It was the only time the Saints ever wore the gold jerseys. Brooks played that entire game, but the defense lost that game. Deuce McAllister had a monster night. It was unbelievable. And then the following week was the Bengals game, and that was the game where you really saw Brooks deteriorate. He physically could not throw the football by midway through the second quarter. It was just that painful for him, and it was just an ugly, because the Bengals kept trying to they were the Bungles. They kept trying to give the game away, and Hazlitt stuck to his guns and kept Brooks in that game, would not put Jake Delhomme in there, and we lost that one. Then I was at the last one, which was the season finale against the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers were pathetic. That's when I think they got – who did they get? They ended up with a really high draft pick that year. Like, they were like in the top 3, if I remember right. And
was that Bianca Batuka?
No. That was 1996. That was the Alex Molden draft because that's who the Saints wanted. They wanted Tim Bianca Batuka, and the Panthers took him in the top 10. I think they took him at 5. So Eddie George is sliding down the draft board. And here come the Saints, and Eddie George is right there, and they take Alex Molden instead. And Eddie George went to the Titans, and, of course, that was the end of the Jim Moore, really, because he would resign that season. But, I mean, the fans will never forgive him for that. That was the worst draft. That was the worst draft ever, as far as
that was worse than the giving up or mortgaging the future on Ricky Williams. It really was.
Well, Ricky Williams actually produced. You see, that was following a terrible offseason because the Saints had lost, in 1995, they lost Morton Anderson. They cut him. So that was a knock against them. And then 1996, you lose Quinn Early. You lose Wesley Walls. Jim Everett was like, you're taking away all my receivers, but they kept talking about drafting Tim Bianca Batuka, but then their justification for not drafting Eddie George was, Mario Bates was only 20 yards or 15 yards away from a 1,000-yard season, so we really have confidence in Mario Bates. Well, you had so much confidence in Mario Bates. Why were you talking about drafting Tim Bianca Batuka? So,
smoke screen.
Oh. Buddy D used to have a ball with that. That's when he used to play the Good Ship Lollipop. Every time we would talk, you hear all the munchkins from Munchkinland singing, we represent the lollipop. Oh, it was hilarious. I mean, he would just, the whole bit, because he thought they were all, the Saints front office was terrible. I mean, it was a triumvirate of Jim Mora, Jim Miller, who handled contracts, and Bill Kuharich. That was the triumvirate, the decision makers. And, the Times-Picayune used to run a feature called X Saint of the Week. Some former Saints players, usually a defensive player, had a monster game. Brett Maxey and Sam Mills were two of their favorites because they went to Carolina. That was the 90s were a terrible time to be a Saints fan. After the 1992 season, after you lost to the Philadelphia Eagles, it goes downhill from there. I mean, it was, 93 to 2000. You just don't even want to think about what was going on with this team because it was horrible. It really was,
Okay, well, after we beat the Ravens, because to be completely honest with you, I don't see the Ravens hitting on much. They are not the team that they once were.
It's one of those things where, it's a game you should win, but they've got some kind of mojo against us. So I don't know how that game's going to play out. I really don't.
It'll just depend on who shows up that day.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the team that made it to the divisional round of the playoffs, or are we talking about the team that played against the following week's team? That very last play of the game. It's going to be a matter of getting up for these games and getting up for these teams on a weekly. On a weekly basis. And the week following the Ravens will be hyped beyond all possible comprehension. It's going to be the rematch of that NFC divisional round playoff game on October the 28th in the same venue as the last time. The New Orleans Saints will visit the Minnesota Vikings.
Yep.
What say you?
Well, this is why you can't do any worse than 3-1 those first four games. I mean, you want to go 4-0, but you cannot do any worse than 3-1 because here comes the part of the schedule where every loss matters. Because if you're talking about seeding, here you're going to be playing the Vikings, and then later on, of course, we talk about Carolina and Philadelphia in the schedule. And then, of course, Atlanta, too, on Thanksgiving night. But you are talking about a game that the loser of this game will end up probably going to the stadium of the winner in the playoffs. So, it's a critical game. And I don't fear the Vikings. I felt the Vikings were a better team. Let me rephrase that. This is a more talented Vikings team than the one we played in the NFC divisional round, because Kirk Cousins is a better quarterback than you had in Case Keenum. I couldn't even think of his name. Case Keenum. Kirk Cousins makes mistakes, though. You also have Davin Cook back. So I don't know how the running game is going to be, if it's going to be more effective than it was, last year against us. But the Saints are the kind of team that give the Vikings trouble, because the Saints are a team that the Vikings cannot just simply put away. If they leave a crack in the door, Drew Brees is going to kick that door open and make plays, just like we saw in the playoff game, and come very close to winning. That's a game that's going to rely entirely on health. I don't know how healthy we're going to be going into that game. There's no way at this point. There's no way I can make a prediction.
Looking back to that divisional round playoff game, we were just about as decimated as we could possibly be and still field a team. All the linebackers were down. We were down to dressing was it 7 offensive linemen all total for that trip. You make a very strong point. It's going to be a matter of the Saints being healthy first and foremost. And as you alluded to, Cousins is going to be an upgrade from Keenum, obviously, and more than just in the payroll. Dalvin Cook, I'm not completely convinced on, and I may be completely off base here, but he's never shown me anything on the field to show me that he is.
He didn't play enough. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
He did very well against us opening night, but I mean, he got hurt after that. Making Cousins win that game by throwing the ball will be key because you're going to rely. Cousins will make mistakes like Case Keenum did.
That's the same thing that the Saints did to him last year when he was with the Redskins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taking intentional grounding penalties and so forth. That'll be the key.
Into receivers that aren't there.
Yeah, and his protection. How good is his protection? I mean, Cousins is going to stand up and take some hits, and Cousins is going to look down the gun barrel and make the throws he needs to make, unlike Keenum, who's just going to throw it up for grabs. But the key is you've got to blindside him. You've got to make him feel pressure that's not there so he doesn't feel comfortable. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about Davenport's role in the defense. But this is where your rookies, Davenport, Smith, Jamerson, if he ends up being an effective player, Kirk Coleman, Patrick Robertson, those guys are going to have to step up and start making the difference in this game because it's going to come down to turnovers. It's going to come down to field position. You're going to have to wear that Vikings defense out. And if you can do that, and this is why I hate where the Ravens game is, because if the Ravens suck, and this is a team that they start thinking about putting Lamar Jackson in now at this point in the season. Now it's early enough, but if, let's just say Flacco is just horrible, okay?
Again.
And you put Lamar Jackson at that point. Now you're starting to Lamar Jackson start playing football the way he likes to play, making plays while pulling it out of his ass, all that kind of stuff. Just playing sandlot football, disorganized football. And the Saints are looking at this game like, we got to play Minnesota next week. Minnesota's the important game. We can lose an AFC game because that doesn't hurt our divisional record when it comes to the playoffs. That all has to start getting factored in. I'm not saying Lamar Jackson's going to come in that early. You're not even Halloween yet, and you're throwing the season in the garbage can if you're putting Lamar Jackson at that point. I don't think they're going to do that, but I'm just saying, let's just say Ravens are 0-8 at this point, or what week are we talking about here again? Let me look at this again. Okay,
October
4, 5,
28th.
6, 7. Yeah, so we're now 0-7. Okay, let's just say they're 0-6, staring at 0-7. The offense is generated maybe 21 points all season. Now the coach, Jim Harbaugh is pretty much looking at. John Harbaugh is looking at, well, let's start trying to generate some offense and make a difference. Not saying it's that point, but you're approaching the midpoint of the season by that point. So it's the 7th week of the season. Who knows? So that's my biggest fear. The Ravens in front of the Vikings game. That's a game that the Saints generally do very well coming out of a bye. I'm just worried that they're going to be looking at This is now becoming the teeth of the schedule. You have the Vikings, you have the Rams, I believe, as well. You've got you've got Carolina twice. You've got the Eagles. You've got the Falcons again later. That's in November. That's a lot to be looking at. It's going to take a team that's very focused on week to week to not blow that kind of blow a game they should win and get caught up in the snowball.
Yeah. That's the second quarter of our 2018 schedule, and we'll be continuing this analysis next week as we look at the third quarter of the schedule, which at this point we're 8 weeks in, 7 games in. How do you see it in those? Those 8 weeks, 7 games.
It's hard to say because the Ingram suspension really throws it, up for grabs. I hope by the 8th week of the season, going to the Minnesota game, we're no worse than 5-2. That's what I'm hoping for. You're at 5-2. Probably in the division lead or right there, right knocking on the door. And you win that Minnesota game. Now you're 6-2 at the midway point. You're setting yourself up for a good run deep into the season. And the only reason why I say 6-2 is let's assume they end up 2-2 in that first 4 weeks. It's tough. It really is. I don't see this team going undefeated rolling into the midway point of the season. I just don't see that happening.
No, me either.
Too many trap games, too many games. I mean, you need to beat Tampa the first week. You need to beat the Browns. You need to beat the Giants. You need to beat the Falcons, but the Falcons game, that's the game that just throw everything out. This is a street fight.
Yeah.
And then the revenge game against the Vikings, you've never beaten the Ravens under Breeze, and then you got the Redskins, another revenge game. That's just a lot, It all depends on the thing we're going to talk about next week. How does Marcus Davenport fit in with this defense? What do you see out of him this coming year?
It's so hard to say. He's going to have to, obviously, you not only did you draft him in the first round, but you went to the extent that you did to draft him in the first round, and the expense of making that move to get him when you did, where you did. Whether or not he's going to be I really don't question as to whether he's going to be a starter or not. If he's not a starter, to me, that just says he's hurt. You don't spend that much and go to that significant an effort for someone that you don't intend on being an opening day starter. And that's just the way that I look at that. Now, the type of difference that he's going to make, despite all these draft pundits, that remains to be seen. The young man has got an incredible amount of talent and ability at the college level. In week 1, when he lines up against Gerald McCoy, against the Buccaneers, I was thinking ahead of myself. In week 1, when he lines up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that is not going to be who he lined up against with UTSA.
Yeah.
You're in school now, son. You're going to have to step it up big time. And I'm not insinuating in any way at all that he will not be able to make that transition, because everything that I've seen on the kid is that he is every bit what we drafted him for.
Yeah.
But as Saints fans in the past several years have seen, you don't just assume that because you spend a ton of money in free agency or a high round draft pick, that doesn't automatically translate into simulated success on this team. So I'm going to hold off my final thought on Marcus Davenport until I see what he brings to the table.
Okay, just out of curiosity, I googled Cam Jordan's stats his rookie year, 2011. Now he was a rotational player. He was not a full-time starter yet in 2011. He logged 18 tackles and 1 sack. Okay, now that was a player who came from a Division I school in UC Berkeley.
Cal.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Cal Berkeley. Yeah,
Cal Berkeley.
Yeah, UC Berkeley. He was not somebody who came from Division two, or whatever they call it now, football team, and he was not as raw of a player as Davenport is. But he only got 1 sack. Now, of course, Jordan followed that up with 8 sacks in 2012, 12.5 in 2013. He only got 7.5 in 2014, 10 in 2015, 13, of course, last year. So he's been an ascending player ever since. And of course, he's increased his tackles. But the key is, how effective is Davenport going to be? And how good is Alex Okafor going to be coming back from a torn Achilles tendon? Because you're going to see those two players rotate in and out a lot. And if Alex Okafor is struggling to come back from his Achilles tendon injury, that's a problem, because that's going to put Davenport out there a lot more. That is going to have the Saints, that side of the line, go through the rookie growing pains. So, it's tough. It's tough. I would hope that Davenport not only is a quick learner and gets on the fast track, but by the Minnesota game and the tough part of the games, he's playing a lot more and making an impact, or making his presence known. And I think that's what we need to look forward to with Davenport. I don't think he's a starter out the gate.
I think you hit the nail on the head with what the missing piece of the equation is going to be, and that's going to be the return, and how the depth of the return of Alex Okafor.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Okafor is 100% by day one of camp, he's your starter. He's returning, and you saw what you got out of Okafor a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that there's going to be too many that are going to complain about the output of Okafor from a year ago before he got injured in, ironically, the Washington game, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Coming back from an Achilles, especially for a player such as a cornerback who has to turn and maneuver, and for a cornerback, half of the game is below the waist, and the other half is above the shoulders, if that makes any sense.
No, it does.
For a defensive lineman, that equation is almost the same. The bend and the twist and the bull rush, all that's going to operate off of how quickly he can maneuver on that ankle. And it's not a given, especially given his age. He's not ancient. I mean, he's not an old man by any stretch of the imagination. But in football years, he's coming towards the end of his career. How effectively he can make that comeback and sustain that comeback. Everybody is they hit the gym like a bat out of hell, but they get on the field and they made that miraculous comeback. They're back 4 months ahead of schedule, and they play one game, and then you don't see them again for another year because they blew out what little progress that they made. I don't think that that's going to be what's going to happen with Okafor. But my point is, you with these types of injuries, you just never know.
Yeah.
And Okafor is going to be the he's going to be the thing that decides exactly, in my opinion. Let me preface this by saying that, in my opinion, Okafor is going to be what decides just exactly how crucial and how necessary that Davenport is and when.
Yeah. If I picked a dark horse, the guy that I think that the Saints defense should get a big season out of, the surprise season, the guy who comes out of nowhere and has an impact, I'm going to say David Onyemata, as in the defensive tackle rotation. I think if David Onyemata, he's been growing just like Cam Jordan has. He's been on an incredible growth spurt, and if this coming season is his breakout season, if he has the kind of impact that Nick Fairley had in 2016, that will help Davenport get through that rookie learning curve, so to speak. It'll help take pressure off of Alex Okafor, because you'll get so much push from the inside between Rankins and Onyemata that I think that's the kind of thing that has to happen. If that happens, then you're looking at a much better pass rushing group as a whole in that front four. It'll take pressure off of the secondary. It'll make it easier for Dennis Allen to call a game because he won't need to call so many blitzes and so many stunts to free up Jordan to have an impact. And that just helps the defense get off the field more on third down, generate a pass rush, and everything else. I mean, it's all predicated in that front four. How much you going to get out of that front four? Is it just going to still be the Cam Jordan show, or do we start seeing Sheldon Rankins create that push? Do you see Okafor coming out? I mean, not Okafor, Onyemata coming out of nowhere, having an impact? And what's the learning curve for Davenport? Those are all questions that have to be answered on that defensive line. All that happens, I think, in a good way. We get a lot of good growth. I think we're going to have a great defense and another special season. If Okafor doesn't come back quickly enough, if Onyemata turns out to be still a guy trying to learn the position, Rankins never really develops into that get that inside push and still the Cam Jordan show, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very, very hard to beat these tougher teams. And
you and I are both students of the game, and not just students of what the game has become, but we're students of where the game came from to be what it is now. And the reason that I say it that way is that, in the barest essential elements of the game, things haven't changed that greatly. You have an offensive line. Get over here where I can get on camera here. You have an offensive line and you have a defensive line. And what happens between those two units, usually, not always, but usually what happens within 3 yards of that line of scrimmage dictates the way that game is going to ultimately be decided.
Yeah.
Now you have these outstanding quarterbacks and these incredible receivers. If that offensive line isn't blocking for that quarterback, he doesn't complete the ball to that outstanding receiver. And conversely, he doesn't get baited into making a huge mistake for that safety to come over and make the pick that he returns for pick 6. As an offensive unit, or excuse me, as a defensive unit, if you can't pressure the quarterback, you will not succeed on defense. You may have a successful series, you may have a successful couple of series, but you are not going to have sustained. I'm having problems tonight, man. You're not going to have that sustained success rate that you think you will.
You end up
And conversely,
7-9.
on the other,
You end up 7-9. That was the Saints' problem. It's one of the main problems. They were 7-9 for so many years. Was their inability to generate a pass rush. Mike Detillier said it best: to win in this league, you got to have a quarterback who can make the throws and put points on the board. And on defense, you got to have a guy who can put that other quarterback on his butt. And that's what you're just talking about right there. You need to have those two kind of players, and that's why the Saints made the trade they made to get that kind of pass rusher, because they've got the quarterback who can score lots of points. They've got one pass rusher. They need a second one that can put the other guy on his butt. And that, to me, that's you're going right into it. That's what you need to win.
And if you don't, you're, like I said, you may have minimal success or what I call sporadic success, but you're not going to have that long and sustained success, excuse me, that you're going to need to win 9, 10, 11 games, make the playoffs, make a playoff run, possibly make the Super Bowl. And, on the other side of the coin, speaking from an offensive standpoint and segueing into our next unit that we're going to discuss, as an offensive unit, if you don't give your quarterback time to throw, and you don't open those running lanes for those running backs, if you allow the game to come to you rather than taking the game to that defensive unit, you're not going to find any measure of success, because it doesn't really matter how great your defense is. Depending on your defense to win games is not a long-term, is not an effective long-term plan for having a winning football team.
If you want to play a game where your defense makes the plays and your defense wins the football game, you play field position and you win with special teams and a strong defense. In very rare cases, you win a championship if your defense plays at a superhuman level. And teams have done that. Are the 85 Bears, 86 Giants, 2000 Ravens. Those are three teams that played with their defense at a superhuman level, and their offense was made enough plays, and their special teams made enough plays that they could win a championship. That was a Jim Mora philosophy. The problem is the defense, as good as it was, it will win you 12 games, 10 games, 11 games every season. But when you play an offense that is just a ticking time bomb, and any minute now it's going to go off and make the plays, then you lose games like the Saints used to lose to the 49ers throughout the 80s and the 90s, 13-12, 20-17, 26-24. You lose those kind of games because all it takes is one drive, one key drive, and you lose because your defense cannot make that one last stop. And that's why I always cringe when I hear people say things like, man, I wish we just had a great defense. We don't need to have a great offense. Just have a great defense. And it's like, no, because
we did that though. We had that great defense during the Dome Patrol days, did we not?
Yes.
And just like you were just saying, how did that turn out?
Yeah. You need to have enough of an offense, and here's the key here with what we're going to talk about next. You have to have an offensive line, and you have to have that elite quarterback who can make his skill position players better than they are, and an offensive line that brings, protects that quarterback and also makes the running game go. What we saw last year was a different formula from almost any other Saints team under Sean Payton, except for probably in 2000. That was probably the closest you got to that. In 2000 with Deuce McAllister and Reggie Bush, with the twosome running back of Ingram and Kamara. And then, you had it when teams decided, I can't believe I'm saying this, but when teams decided, you know what? We're not going to let you beat us with your running game. We're going to dare Drew Brees to beat us. We want to see if Drew Brees can beat our defense with those receivers. And Drew Brees was like, oh, man, absolutely. Hold my beer. I'll be right back.
How'd that work?
Not too good. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. And except for a fluke play, it really didn't pay off, because you saw in the Carolina playoff game, in the Vikings comeback, the offense, once they got on track, once Drew Brees figured out the weaknesses of those defenses, he was really starting to pick those guys apart. So let's just talk about the offensive line real quick. To me, the offensive line, this is all going to revolve around the health of Armstead. How good this line can be is determined purely by Armstead's health. Because if Armstead is healthy, then Pete stays at guard. Unger's your key at center. You got a good guard in Warford. And then Ramczyk, he's in his second season. You've got a power offensive line front that can run the ball, but also pass protects like nobody's business. You have that kind of offensive line, and you can send out your 5 receivers, and they can try and play that game where we're just going to keep everything in front of us, and Drew Brees is going to pick you apart. And if you try and drop somebody down into the box, here comes either Ingram or here comes Kamara out on a swing pass, a screen pass. It's you pick your poison, but it all starts up front. And there's people I know that are like, Armstead, I can't count on him. He's always hurt. Is he really that good? Should we try and trade him, cut him, and stuff like that? Go back and watch that Buffalo game, for example, and just look at how fast Armstead got out in front of those screen passes, those running plays. Watch Drew Brees when he runs that touchdown in. Armstead's about 10, 15 yards down the field, and he levels somebody. And just the speed. You saw Armstead close in on that guy to level him, to allow Drew Brees to run and get into the end zone for a touchdown.
But let me ask you this, Alan. And I've heard this analogy quite a bit since the end of the season. When we, for all the promise and everything that Armstead showed coming out of college and seemed to be stepping into that role of, when we look at Armstead, are we looking at an offensive Donnell Ellerby?
No. I don't agree with that analogy. I know people like to throw that out there because Donnell Ellerby is the last player they can think of that got hurt a lot. But when he came in, he was effective. Armstead is probably your best tackle, and he goes out there and plays hurt. He played that entire Minnesota Vikings game hurt.
Torn.
It was a hip stock, wasn't it? A hip muscle in his hip.
Hip flex.
Remember right? Yes. He has had a string of bad luck, but he is not that kind of player This is what Ellerby was. Ellerby was that guy who, man, I'm just not feeling it today. It's just the hamstring's not going. I don't think I can. He wanted to play when he was 100% healthy, not 80%, not 70%, 100% healthy. And I'm not knocking the guy. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying, he's not a warrior or anything like that. But I'm saying that he had a mentality of, I'm not as effective unless I'm at 100% playing. Okay. I'm not as an effective of a player. Where Armstead is like, tape it up, give me some aspirin, and I'm going to be back out there and play again.
Man, Armstead came from Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Yeah.
If you were upwardly mobile,
yeah,
you were on the field, brother.
Yeah, right. I just quoted Jack Youngblood when I said that. But yeah, I mean, Jack Youngblood with his broken leg said the same thing. Tape it up, give me a couple of aspirin, and go out there and let me go play. I can run on this broken leg. I can put weight on it. This is Dallas. I got to win this game. So, I mean, and that's Armstead's mentality. So that's why I don't like the Ellerby comparison, because
I don't think it's a fair analogy, because you always got the sense with Ellerby, just like you just said, it wasn't so much that he wasn't able nearly as much as it felt like he was choosing not to.
And he was choosing not to because he felt like he would hurt the team by being out there not at 100%. But the fact is, nobody's 100%. From the first practice, you're not 100% anymore. And that was just a mental thing for Ellerby. Whereas Armstead's like, you got to drag me off this field. And that's what I like about the guy. Yes, it's been a problem of him being injured and him not being able to finish games. Because then you do the offensive line shuffle, you've got to kick over Pete, and you got to put somebody in now at guard, and you have to do the whole shuffle.
Which I'm sorry to interrupt, but which now becomes somewhat more of an adventure because you don't have
Clemente anymore. But you've got Bushrod back.
And
so
Larivius.
Here's the kid. Yeah, well, yeah, they brought him back too. I think because they want him to battle Cameron Tom to see who's going to be the veteran guy. Where Will Clapp fits in this, not sure yet. We have to see come preseason. Leonard, I think, is going to be a guy they are going to try and slip through the practice squad because they want to get him in the weight room and they want him to work and develop because he's a long-term project. So I don't think you're going to see much of Leonard in the preseason because I think they're going to try and sneak him through. He may even show up with a mysterious injury if Willie
Snead's pulled hamstring.
You think about who was it? They were trying to save for a couple of years. They just stuck him. They kept saying he was injured. I'm trying to think of who it was with the receiver. They wanted to work on his development more. I can't remember. It'll come to me later on. But anyway.
A receiver?
Yeah, Sean Payton had played this game before.
The guy from New England last year?
No, he was just inactive. No, this was a guy they put on IR.
Carr.
It might have even been Nick Toon he was trying to do this to. I don't remember who it was, but that was a guy that was always injured. He always ended up on IR in preseason. After the end of preseason, we're like, I didn't know he was hurt. And yeah, he had some kind of mysterious injury. But it was a way that Sean could stash him on the roster without risking him to waivers. So
I've had that conversation during preseason games in the Dome. It's like, I didn't know he was hurt. Hell, I didn't even know he was still on the team.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, so Leonard, his thing is going to be, that's a project that they're going to play with, and we'll see what happens. Go from there. But anyway.
Well, let me ask you one more thing about this offensive line unit. Perhaps if if you remember correctly, when we
Mhm.
chose our MVPs for each positional unit,
Mhm.
I chose mine for the offensive line as being Ryan Ramczyk,
Mhm.
the rookie,
Mhm.
the 31st was 31st, yeah, 31st pick of the draft.
Mhm.
Um, do you see him picking up where he left off, or possibly facing a sophomore slump?
No, I see him picking up where he left off. Offensive linemen in general don't usually face those kind of second year slumps because him getting thrown to the fire the way he did and just playing, and you really have to think about, you could count on one hand how many people actually beat him. And then how many, just think of how few holding penalties you heard on him, how few false starts.
Well, he
You know,
graded
he
out
was.
to be like one of the top three
Mhm.
offensive tackles in the league.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about rookie. I'm talking about
Yeah.
league wide. He graded out to be like, I want to say, in the top three.
Yeah. So, you're looking at a player for the most part that played like a veteran. I can't imagine taking a step back. I think he'll just keep on growing from there. And this is what I was saying before about Bushrod now being on the team. If Armstead can't go, Bushrod's the former left tackle. He's not the solid player he was. Definitely not the solid player he was last time he was with the Saints, but he's not the solid player he was after he left the Saints either. Um, he's a
Trip to
guy who can
Chicago will
come in.
do that.
Yeah, he's a guy that can come in and make some plays for you, and you shouldn't have to do the whole offensive line shuffle. You can still keep Pete at guard, and he can do enough for you at left tackle. You're not getting a Bryce Harris. You're not getting a oh, what the hell was that guy who was from the Raiders who were always on and off the roster?
I remember that. I can't.
I can picture him.
Daryl.
No, you're thinking of Daryl Turnstile Tally. The guy who took
No.
Willie Roaf's place. He was a walking turnstile left tackle. But anyway, the a cardboard cutout of an offensive lineman would have been a better guy than that dude. Anyway. That's the key with Bushrod is that you now have a guy who can play tackle. He can play guard in a pinch, but he can play tackle for you. So you don't have to move Pete around. You can keep Pete at guard. And I think that's better for Pete's development because Pete, very quietly now, Pete has developed into one of the better guards in the league. He was murdering people at guard. You saw the Saints when you had Armstead and Pete together, they like to go to that side and run behind those two. And Pete is getting to that second level and just murdering people. He is bulldozing people.
Well,
And
he's got the size of an offensive tackle, and he plays with the speed of a guard, I guess. Nobody's going to ever confuse him as a rabbit, but
well, if I compared him to a Saints player, an old Saints player, I'll compare him to Jim Dombrowski. Dombrowski was a tackle drafted by the Saints in the first round out of Virginia back in 1986. They put him at left tackle, and they put Sam Brock at right tackle. He didn't work out very well at tackle. He had trouble with speed rushes, but when they kicked him to the inside, moved Stan back to the left side, and put Richard Cooper, Kevin Haverdink, and those kind of guys on the right side, you had a very good guard, one of the best guards in Saints history, right there in Dombrowski. So I think that's what you see with Pete. Pete's a little bit stronger of a tackle, but he has trouble with speed rushers as well on the left side. But he is much better as a run-oriented guard who can just fire out the hole, get to that second level, and start hitting people. And it really helps the Saints running game develop because you've got a good solid middle with Pete, Unger, and Warford, and that's where the strength of your team comes in. And this is the thing that gets me. If in that divisional playoff game, we would have had Pete at guard right there in that 3rd and 1, I'm telling you, we pick it up. Because instead of running behind Warford, where they're able to fill that gap, you had Clemente right there at guard and a struggling Armstead. You run Kamara through the A gap between Unger and Pete. We're picking up that first down, and we win that ball game. Because I don't care who the hell's on the other side. Pete's going to stand those guys up. So it's just. I'm just reliving that game. There's so many key moments in that game that made the difference. I've
said it many times, and I haven't changed my mind much since it happened. I have resigned myself to thanking God for small miracles. I'm not near about going to concede the better team to be in the Vikings, but we were just basically a water boy and assistant coach from being completely depleted.
Yeah,
manpower wise.
Yeah.
So and I've always been one of those people that if you can't win all of them, don't win any of them. It's more painful, as great as it was to beat Carolina for the 3rd time in the season, to lose to Minnesota, and not just that it happened, but how it happened was still 150 times better than possibly going to the NFC Championship game and losing, or even worse yet, going to the Super Bowl and facing the New England Patriots and losing to them.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't think, judging by the way Philadelphia came out and played that game and the way they approached that postseason, the whole dog's head thing because they were the underdogs, I don't think we win that game in Philadelphia.
Me either.
I wanted to beat the Vikings because that first half was probably the worst first half of football the Saints played since the first 2 games of the season.
Sure.
And to come back and take the lead twice the way we did, it's very reminiscent of that 49ers game in 2011. And to come so close to winning that game, stealing that game, really. You're stealing that win. You're winning like you beat the Redskins. You're walking out of that place, stealing it from that team. That's what hurts more than anything else, because that's a game that by halftime I'm resigned to the fact, oh, well, it was a nice run. Those damn Vikings are going to get their revenge. They're going to talk shit about 2009 and see what happens when you can't cheat, and Bounty Gate and all the other stuff. And to do that and look at their faces like, oh, my God, here we go again. Same old Vikings. This is what the Vikings do. The whole skull, bring it on home and all this other stuff. And no. You're the Vikings. Don't you remember the legacy of failure that your franchise has hanging over you? 4 Super Bowl losses. Then after the Super Bowl losses, now 5 NFC Championship losses. This is the team that you are. You are a loser, okay? And you can put whoever you want in those uniforms, you're still going to lose. That's who you are. You are a loser. You are George Costanza in a Vikings uniform. I mean, you like
yeah, well, I have a very good friend that works with my wife at RMC, and she is from Iowa, and she is about as staunch and diehard a Minnesota Vikings fan as there is. I avoided her for like 3 days after that game.
I would tell her the same thing. Tell me I'm wrong. Where am I wrong in this comparison? You know,
You're not. You're not.
you
And
know,
like I said earlier, you and I had talked about this on the air and prior to going on the air. Things run in a cycle. What is doesn't really get that far away from that line as to what it really is. A team that historically is this, historically is going to be that.
It's
look at the Detroit Lions. Look at the Cleveland Browns.
You know, here the funny thing about the Cleveland Browns, we talked about this before, and we got to wrap this up soon. But the funny thing about the Cleveland Browns is, in the 50s and the 60s, early 60s, they were the New England Patriots. Okay,
yeah, Otto Graham.
The Otto Graham and Jim Brown era. You know, they were the New England Patriots. They were the best, one of the best teams in football all those years. You go.
Godzilla used to be a little tiny lizard too, though.
Yeah, well, until he got radiation. But you know, I'm just saying. You look at the history of that franchise, and you start watching those old NFL films of the '60s.
Marion Motley. Yeah,
who are the teams though? And you see in the '60s though, of every year in the title games. It's the Baltimore Colts. It's the Cleveland Browns. It's the
Philadelphia Eagles.
Eagles, early 60s, but yeah, the Green Bay Packers, the Dallas Cowboys. You see, as those teams started getting better and getting into the championship rounds and stuff like that, the Cleveland Browns were always there. You know, Jim Brown's last year, he won a championship. He won the NFC Championship or NFL champion in '64. So, it's just, it's amazing to think about. But when it went from the '60s into the '70s, the Cleveland Browns fell apart after that.
By the same token, and this is another podcast for another time. This is the whole the league-wide podcast that we apparently are going to have to start if we keep running over. If you look, that transition of power from Paul Brown to the next man in line, I can't remember who it was.
Art Modell. Well, Art Modell was the owner. He bought it out from Paul Brown, but it was
okay. Well, you look at that transition of power from Brown to whoever.
The head coach
that team. That the Browns team went downhill, and you can honestly say the same thing about the Green Bay Packers. When they went from the head coaching of Vince Lombardi to whoever was next there, they became basically irrelevant till Mike Holmgren.
Yeah, well, yeah. The problem with so the next guy was Blanton Collier. I knew that guy's name, Blanton Collier, and then you had Blanton Collier was retired in 1970. That's when the change happened. You had Nick Skorich as the head coach, then Forrest Gregg, speaking of the Packers. Sam Rutigliano, that's the Mistake by the Lake coach. That's the Cardiac Kids.
I remember Rutigliano. He was Sipe's coach.
Yes, Brian Sipe. And, that was the last, Rutigliano, then Marty Schottenheimer. That was the Browns' best eras right there. You had the Cardiac Browns of the late of 1980, the Mistake by the Lake, Red Right 38. Red Right 88. Red Right 88. That was the interception. And then you had Marty Schottenheimer come and take over, and you had the drive and the fumble that kept them out of the Super Bowls. And then after that, it completely falls apart because you had Bud Carson, architect of the Steel Curtain. I don't remember Jim Schaffner. That must have been after Carson was fired. Then Bill Belichick, and then the team leaves. Phil Bankston was the head coach who Lombardi appointed to the Packers. But the Packers were old by 67, 68. They were an old team. And then Dan Devine, the ex-Notre Dame coach, then they got caught up in the whole Lombardi era. You had Bart Starr come in for a long time. Then you had Jim Forrest Gregg, I think, even tried that team, and Jim Irsay, not Jim Irsay, Lindy Infante with Magic Man, Dan Mikowski. So I mean,
Don
Mikowski. But yeah, then it's Holmgren. Holmgren was the first when they finally broke out of the Lombardi history, and you had Ron Wolf as a GM, and the Packers hired Holmgren and just reshaped that organization. Of course, bringing Reggie White and Brett Favre, the team becomes a lot better. But
but that wasn't exactly an overnight success either. By bringing Holmgren in, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that was
really,
a work in progress.
It was really Brett Favre coming in and getting him under control. Yeah, by his third year, that's when the Packers couldn't beat the Cowboys. That was their biggest problem because that was the tail end of the Jimmy Johnson era and Barry Switzer era. Once that era finished, then the Packers were able to start winning Super Bowls. So anyway,
we're gonna have to devote one show. I'm brainstorming on it right now. We're going to devote one show to not being necessarily about just the New Orleans Saints, but I guess we'll have to make an expanded format where we discuss the entire league. And then we'll have another show where we do like just the history. Fully utilize our talents.
There you go. My total command of useless information. Well, I started watching.
No. It's not total command. It's bottomless pit. Remember that.
Yeah, that's right. I started watching football. The first Super Bowl I remember actually sitting and watching was Super Bowl 10. Now, my dad was at Super Bowl 9. He went to all the Super Bowls that were played in Tulane Stadium. He went to 4. He went to 6 and 9 in Tulane Stadium. But the first one I can sit and remember sitting watching was Super Bowl 10. And, because I was a big Lynn Swann fan. So, I had to watch it. I mean, I tore up my pants as a kid trying to catch a ball like Lynn Swann did on concrete in the playground at school. And, I had a uniform, and anybody who grew up in the 70s might remember this. My mom would put these patches on these uniforms, khaki pants, and the patch she put on this cast iron patch about this long. You look like Dennis the Menace or a Rag Muffin or something like that. You put this cast iron patch on, but the only thing that was good was all the other kids had them too. The khaki you would just tear up. Because I would jump up full extension, jump up in the air and try and catch the ball like Lynn Swann. His kangaroo catch on the sideline in Super Bowl 10 on pavement. Then come back covered up in scratches and things. And anybody who went to St. Matthew like I did, and we talk about this all the time, my friends from grade school, Miss Dot, the secretary, her thing was, put mercurochrome on it. You remember that stuff? Mercurochrome.
Monkey blood.
Yeah, the red stuff, and then, everything would turn white and it would burn. And she's like, oh, that's just getting the poison out. No, that's mercury. That's why we don't use this stuff anymore. But, you come.
If it ain't burning, it ain't doing no good.
That's right. It's not clean. It's cleaning the wound out. That kind of stuff. All on my arm and elbow. I still got scars. All on my arm and elbow and stuff like that. That stuff would be all over. Orange stuff. But I mean, that was when you were showing you were a tough kid. You come home with covered in mercurochrome. So anyway. That's a group of stories for another time. I could tell you stories about playing football.
I'm gonna have to start taking notes during our show so that I can remember all these rabbits that we chase, so that we can add that to the DVD outtakes for season 3.
If you were a kid,
season 2,
when the Nerf football was invented in the 70s, and you were a kid, a boy in the 70s, you showed up to school to Nerf football, it was on. It was on. Come recess, there better be a game going on. And, everybody could throw a perfect spiral throwing a Nerf football. But, yeah.
Not everybody.
Then there was nothing like getting it wet and throwing at your friend. Getting a good soaking wet so it's heavy. And then you throw it at your friend, and you can see the water spinning off of it as it's coming towards you. And it's like a rock that hits you. Oh, God. So, anyway.
and it hits your friend in the back of their head, and it looks like a minor explosion.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
they hit the ground.
Exactly. So anyway, thank you guys. Yeah, we'll talk about horrible things we used to do to, our friends. I used to do to my brother, everything else, when another time.
Poor Danny.
Oh, poor Danny, my ass. Let me tell you some stories about that kid. Mr. Temper Tantrum. We used to call him Donald Duck because he'd get so pissed off all the time and everything. So,
well, I guess we can cross Danny off the Christmas list.
He's watching this show. He will watch this show, and he's going to have something to say about it. So, anyway.
Well, maybe I'll open a dialogue between the two of you.
Oh, yeah. Talk about his evil older brother, and I talk about Mr. Pissed Off, whatever year it was. That was his nickname because he was always mad. True story. My grandfather used to call him
that. As soon as we get off the air, I'm going to send you something, and you're going to immediately understand it.
My grandfather used to call him Mr. Pissed Off of whatever year it was, 1984, 1983, because everything would piss him off. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. I'll tell you more about.
Wait! Before we get off the air, I want to say a very special. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. I turned my head too fast. Sorry about that. I want to say a very special congratulations to my co-host, Mr. Alan Ulrich, and his great wife, Debbie, on the graduation of their last in line there.
We just congratulations. She did all the hard work. We just wrote the check.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that as well.
Yeah. She
congratulations to Alan and Miss Debbie and Reagan.
Yes, Reagan. She'll be at Tulane University next year.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, she earned it, so she's going to be at Tulane. So, yeah. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be different. I have 2 at UL and 1 at Tulane now, so it'll be fun.
I saw that picture of the entire family plus Dad standing there.
Mm-hmm.
I've met you.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. We've had Matt on several times. Matt is the only one that has ever co-hosted the show in my absence.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that Matt is a very large young man.
Yes. He's my brother, probably guy too. He's built just like my brother. And my middle one is the one next to me in the picture. She's 20. She's been on the show a couple of times. Allison, that's the basketball player. And then Reagan is the academic. And she's
that's
she's
a
excited.
Word that's never. I'm just glad I'm sitting here because that's not a word that's used in my proximity very often.
Well, I'll tell you this much. Reagan is going to be tutoring, teaching a class and tutoring math at Newman High School. Well, not high school kids, but Newman High School this summer. She'll be teaching 4th graders, I believe, tutoring 4th graders in math. So, hey, more power to her. She's excited. She was one of these people who did a lesson plan, and halfway through the interview, the guy just says, "All right, stop right here. You're hired." But that's her mom. That's her mom. That's all her mom. So anyway, very exciting. She's looking forward to Tulane next year, and as fast as high school went, college is going even faster. I will probably have 3 graduations back to back to back again, with Matt graduating, then Allison, then Reagan, all very close together because Matt is on the 5-year plan. So, which is no big deal. I was on the 5-year plan too. I had a good time.
Well, here's my last hope. Come here, dude.
There you go. There you go.
This is the Under the Dome debut of my young man, Mr. Andrew. You remember Mr. Allen? You remember seeing him down there in New Orleans?
You looked at my ugly mug on TV. I like the picture, at your graduation with the whole arms up,
I'm here to tell you that was one of my proudest moments as a parent. And I just happened, when it happened, I happened to be sitting there with my cell phone filming it.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did it, I dropped my phone. I was like, oh, no. And I looked back at it, and I got the whole thing, and I was like, yeah.
There you go. There you go.
This is what happens when lead singers have children.
There you go. Well, I'll tell you what. Somebody hits the fast forward button once they hit 10, so enjoy every minute of it.
Absolutely.
Because I can't tell you how fast high school went for all 3 of them. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us tonight. I know we went way over time, and, thank you for sticking with us and all of our personal stories and accomplishments and so forth.
Hey, that's what makes Under the Dome, because we're all family here.
Well, I can tell lots and lots of stories about I'll tease this one. Danny can attest to this one. My brother's name is Danny. He can attest to this one. The infamous 1978 Thanksgiving football game at my grandmother's house, where I got called for a face mask penalty by my grandfather, who had the referee, and he doesn't even have a helmet on. So, you can see how this game was called. It was the worst officiating job I have ever personally witnessed. This was like the Harlem Globetrotters against who are they? The Generals,
Washington Generals.
Yeah, the Washington. I was the Washington Generals. My brother got away with murder that day, so he could tell you all about this game. I can tell him about it too. Thanksgiving, 1978. He's got his version. I have the truth. So here we go.
Thank you guys for joining us tonight, man.
Thank you.
We love you all. We thank you so much for being a part of what we do and allowing us to be a part of what you do. We invite you to go and subscribe to our show on iTunes and on YouTube, and join us on Facebook at Under the Dome Podcast. And
40 years ago this Thanksgiving, 40 years this Thanksgiving, there will be a revenge game. I'm telling you. We will play a revenge game. He has to come in for Thanksgiving so we can do this.
Man, I sat here the other day and thought about running now. When I was a player, I ran a 4.340, and I sat down the other day and thought about running a 40-yard dash and hyperventilated.
Oh my God! Yeah, this would be an embarrassment to the sport of football to see 2 people try and play this game now. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time under the dome. Good night, everybody.
Good night.